Welcome to the final video in the introduction to Python, our tutorial. This is the course Digital Economy and Data Analytics. My name is Eiko van Vuren and I would like now to go on with two important topics with respect to Python, two important topics that we will use later on in our tutorial as well. And the first topic is going to be about pandas. Pandas is just another important library, and the reason why it's so important is because of the fact that it is used for so-called data frames. I'm pretty sure that you have heard about data frames before because of the fact that also in R you do have data frames. However, unlike in R, in Python it is the case that data frames are not in standard Python. And that implies, like what we already have seen with respect to NumPy, that we have to import a library. In order to import that library, what we need to do is that we have to write down import pandas. Well, that would be sufficient, but then what we have to do is that every time we are going to call a particular function in this library pandas, then we have to write down pandas as well. And that's the reason why it is very common standard to instead have import pandas as PD. Well, then what we can do is that we can then construct data frames. However, we can do that, of course, by hand. And I could talk a lot about that, but I'm not going to talk about that in this, say, short tutorial. The main reason for that is that I don't have that much time for that. And another reason why I'm going to do it is because of the fact that in most cases it is much better and much more useful to actually construct data frame from outside of Python and to, for example, use an Excel sheet instead, and then in fact import that into Python. So, and that is exactly what we are going to do over here by writing a particular data frame that I call here df for data frame, and we are going to then import a particular, say, Excel sheet which is called Toyota XLSX. This is actually nothing else as an Excel sheet that later on you're going to use in this tutorial that has Toyota cars in it, or information about different Toyota cars. And well, in order to include this, say, Excel sheet into a data frame in Python, what we're going to do first of all is that we are going to have this PD, of course, for this PD that we have over here for pandas, and then in addition to that we are going to then have dot, and then we are going to have read Excel in order to be able to read an Excel file. And then the next thing that we can do is that we then can simply print our data frame by printing df. Take into account that, like in R, if we are going to do this thing over here, then we will only get a couple of rows with respect to the particular data frame, not all the rows, and we will also get only a couple of different columns. So like what we see in R, this is not so great in order to get, say, the full data sets, and also not so great in order to know about all the different variables in the particular data set. In order to get a list of the variables, it is better to use the following, namely to print and then having df, another time this data frame that we have over here, and then we are going to use the function info as we have it over here. And then we get a full list of all the different variables that are in this case included in, say, our Toyota Excel sheet. And take into account that since we have data on cars, that implies that, for example, we're going to get the, say, the particular model of the car, we're going to get the mileage of the car, we are going to get the price of the car, as well as maybe the year in which the car has been built. So these are all kinds of things that we might be interested in. Then one thing that we can do is that we can then get one particular variable by simply using again df, and then having the particular, say, variable name in between these square brackets. And well, you should of course realize that this has to be exactly the name of a particular variable, of course, and that we can of course get by listing this print df info that we have over here. And then we can store that in, say, a new very small data frame, and that is in this case this variable model that we have over here. Now we can of course now print our, say, variable model, taking into account again that this will not list all of the different rows of this particular variable, but only a couple of them, like what you're used to of in R. Well, as I already said, there is much more to say about pandas, but for that I would like to refer to a particular website, and that is this link that we have over here. Now I would like to go on with the final topic, and that's the topic of error handling. We should realize that as in many, or you could say in any other language, it is always the case that at the moment that Python discovers an error, then it immediately stops, and it will actually give you a particular error message. And well, in programming language, this is usually called crashing. So it implies that our program in this case crashes. Even though that's very annoying, we should realize that in many situations this is actually great. And the reason why it is actually great is because of the fact that it shows that there is an error in our program that we should take into account, and therefore, especially in the debugging stage, it is nice to see that actually there is an error, instead of, well, finding out in fact that the programming, even though there was an error, the program actually ran on and produced completely, well, useless results. So therefore you should realize that, at least generally it's the case, that it's good that a program actually stops at the moment that it discovers an error. However, this is not always true. In some instances, it would be better if your program is able to go on as it naturally arises in the procedure of your program. It sometimes is inevitable that you sometimes will actually get a particular kind of error. And then, in order not to have all the time, even though you do know that these errors actually occur, to have a program that crashes, you could actually try to omit that. And in order to give you a particular example, one thing that we are going to do next week is that we're going to look at web scraping. That essentially implies that we are going to try to get information from the internet. And actually, that is something that I did as well here by getting this Excel sheet, that is this Toyota Excel sheet that has all the data on different Toyota cars that I received by actually doing web scraping with Python and on the website of Toyota. However, it might of course be possible that at the moment that we have thousands of cars on the Toyota website, that some of those cars, they do not have all the information. It might, for example, be possible that well, some of the cars, they for example might not have the mileage. Well, then at the moment that we are going to look for the mileage, then it may be possible that the Python is going to give us an error simply because of the fact that the mileage is simply not there. Well, then at that moment in time, we don't want our Python program to completely crash, because of the fact that that would imply that we completely are going to lose also all the information from all the other cars. Maybe it's better just to skip that particular car that doesn't have any mileage and to go on with any of the remaining cars that we still have on the website of Toyota. So therefore, in this particular situation, we don't want to have that our, say, program is going to stop every time it encounters something strange. Well, the question arises, how can we do that? Well, we can do that by using try and except, and here we again are going to look at an example, but also here this is actually a very trivial example. We first of all are going to initialize or declare two different variables. First of all, a is equal to 5 and b is equal to 0, and then we are going to use this try. Try actually starts a new block, so we have to indent then, and then we are going to get this quotient over here. And quotient in this case is simply a variable that is a divided by b. But take into account that because of the fact that b is equal to 0, this generally will actually give us an error. So if we simply would have written this line over here, not here after try, but just before it, well then at that moment in time, we simply would have had that our program would crash with a particular error like, well, I cannot divide by 0. However, maybe we don't want that in this case. So therefore, even though we never get to this part over here, because of the fact that we can actually never print this thing over here, because of the fact that it already crashes over here, what we are going to have over here is that as soon as now Python is going to encounter an error in this block that we have over here, it will immediately jump to this except that we have over here. Well then, in order to explain this exception that we have over here is simply our error message. It's a string that captures our error message, in our case most likely something like I cannot divide by 0. And well, that we can actually capture in a string, and that is this string x that we have over here, this variable x that we have over here. And then what we could do next is that we are going to print our, say, error message like what we have over here. Take into account that even though in this particular situation our program of course is not going to stop because of the fact that it might actually run here even further, we should take into account that again this looks a little bit silly because of the fact that getting this error message over here we could also have gotten by having this this line over here, not here but then over there. Of course then our program would have completely stopped, but we should realize that that might actually in this particular situation have been the best option. But take into account again that that might not always be the case. It might sometimes be the case that in this except block that we have over here, we might instruct Python what to do in the case that something strange actually happens, like what I had in my example with respect to scraping Toyotas on the Toyota website. It may be possible that it is going to be the case that some of the cars, they do not have all the information. Well, then it might be better to skip that particular car, but to go on, of course, to the next cars.